Esto es Entérate, un espacio de difusión de las actividades institucionales, académicas y de actualización del máximo órgano jurisdiccional en materia electoral. Hoy continuaremos con la segunda parte de los comentarios finales vertidos en la conferencia global sobre financiamiento político. En esta emisión les compartimos la intervención de Quraishi, excomisionado electoral de la India, para después continuar con las conclusiones de Obiageli Ezekwesili, asesora principal económica, Iniciativa Política de Desarrollo Económico de África. En esta oportunidad se destacó que las lecciones aprendidas en esta conferencia global serán registradas con el fin de inspirar a futuro buenas prácticas en la formulación de políticas públicas. Acompáñenos a conocer las reflexiones en esta sesión de trabajo. Comenzamos.
Ahí está, me parece, la clave. Y mucho de esto depende del tercer punto que voy a hacer. Y el tercer punto tiene que ver con la efectividad e independencia de quienes supervisan el cumplimiento de esta legislación y sancionan. Lo más obvio es que las autoridades encargadas de hacer cumplir la legislación de financiamiento político necesitan recursos suficientes para aplicar la ley, recursos financieros, recursos humanos, pero además herramientas legales adecuadas, y eso tiene que ver con cosas como lo que han hecho en México, también lo hicieron en mi país, en Costa Rica, de levantar el secreto bancario, levantar el secreto tributario cuando se trata de financiamiento político, darles a las autoridades encargadas de vigilar el cumplimiento de la legislación acceso directo a los tribunales, etcétera, herramientas legales. Y depende crucialmente de la independencia de esas autoridades. Y este es un punto que ha sido reiterado a lo largo de estos 2 días y medio. Marin Marcela decía en alguno de los paneles que, y yo personalmente tiendo a estar de acuerdo con esto, que en ese sistema para asegurar el cumplimiento de la legislación, de preferencia, ni los partidos ni el gobierno deben estar involucrados. Y eso por lo menos por 2 razones. Primero, por una cosa que señalaba Marcin Walewski, porque en muchas ocasiones la ley se utiliza para perseguir a la oposición. Se aplica aquella frase atribuida al general Perón de que para mis amigos todo, para mis enemigos la ley. Ese es un primer problema. Y el segundo problema, quizá más importante, es que uno de los grandes destinatarios de los controles del financiamiento político debe ser el propio gobierno, toda vez que uno de los problemas más graves y generalizados en esta materia es el abuso de los recursos estatales. Y esto, el abuso de los recursos estatales, me parece que nos lleva tanto a un punto de investigación, creo que hay que saber mucho más sobre esto, pero también a un punto de acción. Yo creo que sería maravilloso que todos tratáramos de colaborar en el desarrollo de metodologías que permitan a los entes que hacen observación electoral incorporar esto como parte de su trabajo, incorporar esto como un componente habitual, inherente del trabajo de monitoreo electoral. Habida cuenta de que es un tema muy importante. Si no lo hacemos, francamente, vamos a condenar a las observaciones electorales a ser cada vez menos relevantes. El cuarto punto, cuando hablamos de la efectividad de los controles del financiamiento, como en muchas otras cosas en esta discusión, es muy importante abrazar un enfoque holístico de este problema, en por lo menos 3 formas. En primer lugar, hay que ser holístico y amplio en cuanto al tiempo de aplicación de los controles. El presidente Josipovic decía de manera muy certera que no se trata únicamente de proteger la integridad de las elecciones, sino la integridad de todo el ciclo político. Esta es una tarea permanente. Hay que ser holístico a la hora de pensar en quienes coadyuvan en este proceso. Esto no es un trabajo únicamente para los reguladores. Armando Novoa, de Colombia, hacía una observación muy interesante. Decía que cuando se produjeron serios casos de penetración del crimen organizado en la política colombiana, las soluciones no vinieron del sistema político, sino de una confluencia de actores, algunos medios de prensa, la sociedad civil organizada y los jueces. Entonces hay más que reguladores en esta discusión. Y en tercer lugar, y muy importante, hay que ser holístico a la hora de pensar en los instrumentos que son necesarios para asegurarnos el cumplimiento de la legislación. La regulación del financiamiento político, stricto sensu, es parte de un ecosistema de regulaciones y de protecciones a la integridad de la política. Un ecosistema en el que entran las protecciones, las regulaciones al lobbying, en el que entran las regulaciones que tienen que ver con el conflicto de interés, las declaraciones de activos, la protección a la libertad de prensa, las normas que hacen al secreto bancario y tributario, las normas que tienen que ver con el lavado de dinero, las normas de protección a los denunciantes, las reglas de inmunidad parlamentaria, como lo mencionaba ayer Sergei Levchenko. Todas estas cosas tienen que trabajar al unísono y las regulaciones al financiamiento político y su cumplimiento no pueden estar divorciadas de este ecosistema más amplio. Y un punto final sobre esto de los instrumentos, un punto específico sobre el que creo que debemos pensar y actuar mucho más. Cuando hablamos de instrumentos para asegurar el cumplimiento de la legislación y de las reglas de financiamiento, es esencial que discutamos sobre el papel de las nuevas tecnologías. Las nuevas tecnologías pueden ser un instrumento muy poderoso para mejorar los niveles de cumplimiento. Y esto es un tema de investigación, pero también de acción. Creo que aquí hay, en las organizaciones representadas en este foro, hay muchísimo talento para desarrollar aplicaciones y todo tipo de instrumentos para aprovecharnos de las nuevas tecnologías en función del cumplimiento de la legislación y los controles del financiamiento político y de la integridad política más ampliamente. En última instancia, mejorar el cumplimiento de las reglas y eliminar la impunidad no es una tarea únicamente de los reguladores, sino de toda la sociedad. Una sociedad, como se ha dicho aquí, vigilante, permanentemente vigilante, es la mejor protección de la integridad de las elecciones y de la política en general. Gracias.
Las discusiones que hemos tenido a lo largo de estos 2 días y medio, a lo largo de 12 sesiones de trabajo. Así que es un esfuerzo muy grande que obviamente no pretende ser un resumen, sino tan solo la identificación preliminar de aquellos aspectos que los relatores han considerado como más relevantes, sin perjuicio que después haremos un informe detallado sobre el seminario en sí. Habiendo agotado esta primera parte, ahora me gustaría entrar a la segunda parte de esta mesa de clausura e invitar al doctor Qurashi que nos dé su primera reacción por 5 minutos, y les voy a rogar a todos ser estrictos en el cumplimiento del tiempo, desde la perspectiva de los organismos electorales, a algunas de estas conclusiones y obviamente su perspectiva sobre la conferencia.
Thank you very much. I am the former Chief Election Commissioner of India, and I have seen elections from the closest quarter. My own conclusion from this conference and earlier conferences is that election is not just one of the end all and be all of democracy. It is one of the components of democracy, but perhaps the most critical and important component. Second conclusion, which is very clear from all the deliberations, that corruption in election is very widespread. It's an international phenomenon. And the root cause of all corruption, according to our experience, is election. Because rest follows. Therefore, role of money power becomes the most critical issue. And if we have to clean up the system, we have to make sure that elections are cleaned up, and for which we have to strengthen the election commission. I had said that I go back with a mixed feeling. One is a consolation that we thought India as the election commission is considered the most powerful commission in the world, but we accept that we have failed against money power. But to see that all others are also struggling with the same problem is a bit of a consolation, if you may say so. At the same time, there is a disappointment that why the solution has been eluding us all these years. I draw a positive conclusion out of that. The fact that all of us are in the same boat, probably we will now find a solution faster than we have thought. This conference has thrown up lots of success stories, lots of models from which we can draw. What we need, as we conclude, that we need good laws, we need effective implementation, and surely we need powerful election commission. I'm very happy to say that this year International Ideas Focus has been to find solutions. This is the second series of 3 conferences, and a blueprint for the action is emerging very surely and clearly. One conclusion which I draw from all these deliberations is that we have to enlarge the catchment area for our deliberations. Right now it has only been academics or maybe some election managers who have been discussing these issues and sometimes bringing civil society. But we probably need to bring in more of media because they play a very important role in policy formulation. They have become the biggest pressure group. And also we should bring in the judiciary. As we have seen, judiciary has been playing a very important role in the electoral reform where the parliament has been failing us. From the group reports, I find that there are at least one thing which appealed to me most. First, the group talked about, I think, the lack of gender equality. I'm very happy to say that for gender equality, we don't necessarily have to depend on laws. There are many things we can do ourselves. But in the election commission did 3 things which have turned out to be historic. First, we started monitoring the electoral roll to see whether genders are equally represented. When we started 5 years ago, we were abysmal. And now we have brought the gender gap to almost 0. Secondly, through voter education, we were targeted women, and in half of Indian states, women outnumbered men as voters, although their absolute numbers are smaller. And third, one of the contributory administrative measures we did was that when they come to vote, there are long queues. Now, women have a lot of work to do at home. They find it very difficult to spend hours away from home. We say for every man who goes inside the polling booth, allow 2 women. As a result, the women's queues were disappearing very fast, and then they were sending all other neighbors to come and vote very well. Then the second group talked about involving stakeholders, because if they are involved, would have been that we wait for them to make a mistake and pounce on them. We said, no, that's not what we want. That's the last thing we would like to do. We would like to prevent it. So we called them over. We explained our new reforms and guidelines, and they showed a lot of positive interest. Third group is stressed on civic education. Again, we had a very interesting experience in India. 5 years ago, when we mooted the idea of civic education, voter education, we were criticized by our own colleagues. They said, educating voters is not your job. Your job is to conduct elections. But I said nothing doing. Because when there is voter apathy, turnout is only 25%, the legitimacy of the representatives is questioned. Then people talk of drastic measures like compulsory voting. All these are not acceptable. So we found civic education is a very, very powerful tool, and which will happen if we involve more stakeholders like academics and media and others. And finally, although I've touched upon this earlier, sanctions versus motivation. One great example of the motivation is Indian example, where political parties themselves have come up with a model code of conduct. It is not a law, but compliance to the model code of conduct is better than any law of the land. And what is the model code? We will not disturb each other's meeting, no rebel rousing, no caste and communal appeal, no hate speech, no abuse of state authority. In fact, we have seen that the ruling party starts hating us before long,
because we do not allow them to abuse their authority. We transfer the officers whom they appoint to influence elections. So model code is a thing which shows that there are possibilities beyond legislation also. And I think in the end, I feel that election management bodies should be included more and more. And finally, sir, I would like to mention that international support there are many upcoming or international or the bodies of election management bodies. For instance, we have South Asian FAMBOSA, we have an Asian Election Association of Election Authorities, we have GEO, we have AWEB. I think you need to work a little more closely. You can provide technical support, you can give input, you can do a lot more hand-holding, because they're coming together and for experience sharing will prove to be very effective. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I am very delighted to be able to give some perspective from the angle of civil society. And the first thing that I would like to do is to state clearly that there is a necessity to expand this conversation, in a way that enables us set a global public agenda for this conversation beyond the community of experts in elections and activities connected to political systems. So the first thing for me is political and economic reforms need to now go hand in hand. We need to be able to have the political scientists push the necessity for economists as collaborators in recognizing that today's global economic inequality is being driven by the seizure of the political space by the few global elite that have the capacity to influence politics across nations. And so one major thing that I would hope that international IDEA and collaborators would do is to launch the process of a global study on the effect of political money in politics on the global economic inequality. There's got to be a study that pushes everyone to an understanding that this phenomenon is not compartmentalized at all. And then the second point is that for citizens who do not immediately consider this an issue, it is because they are distant from the process of money in politics. And so as we look at reviewing the various options for financing political parties and candidates, is it possible to begin to look at options that would make citizens feel they are investors in the process and therefore be more willing and be more involved in the kind of scrutiny that would enable the better regulation of existing systems that have been proposed and not operating at par. And then part of that, as the number 3, is that putting the citizens at the center of this conversation will require much more than moral suasion. So how about a shock therapy? A shock therapy in the sense of being able to show to citizens the direct effect of either illicit money or even corporate business money in their politics. How the purchase of policies and the purchase of spending priorities of government lead to poverty and impoverishment. So it is important, as I propose, that perhaps one of the things to do would be to follow the model of Transparency International. How about a ranking of countries in terms of their money in politics score? Is it possible to assemble a group of eggheads that can think of how to analyze the situation in various countries and to come up with a ranking that would shock not only the citizens, but also the actors in the political space into the necessary action that needs to be taken. And then I said, the exclusionary, number 5 for me, the exclusionary impact of money in politics on women can be used as an entry point to capture a huge population of citizens that are interested in this topic. That catchment might actually become the best collaborators that we have to move this agenda forward. And then the 6th one is the role of technology. I said, today's world is a world of collaborative partnership. It is time for IDEA to take its war to the industry, to take its partnership to the technology industry, and to see how, in a deliberate and intentional way, especially in jurisdictions that are weaker, the kinds of systems that would enable them do this more effectively and more efficiently can begin to be developed. And then the 7th one is the role that IDEA, international IDEA, can play in strengthening the capacity of independent electoral commissions across the world, especially in weaker jurisdictions. Is it possible to have regional kinds of standards that different regions would commit to working toward? Is it possible to do that? Because sometimes we have seen that regional mechanisms have a way of forcing domestic reforms. And then I think this is my final point, and I will shut up. I said that especially as it concerns the matter of abuse of state resources, abuse of state institutions, I said this calls attention to the fact that we're discussing a broader governance agenda. And so ensuring that we're not isolating this problem from the broader necessity to consistently push an agenda for improvement in good governance across countries is going to be important, so that we're not insular in the way that we're trying to tackle a problem that is a manifestation of broken governance across countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much for bringing the voice from civil society with these very good ideas, and also for creating the connection when you address the issue of the relevance of the work of regional organization. And now I will ask Francisco Guerrero from the Organization of American States to address precisely this issue. Francisco.
Gracias por acompañarnos en esta emisión de Entérate. Los esperamos en otra oportunidad con más de las conclusiones vertidas en la Conferencia Global sobre Financiamiento Político. Soy Roxana Noriega. Hasta la próxima.